It was a chilly afternoon in downtown, the kind of day where the sun barely made its way through the clouded sky. The streets hummed with the usual sounds of a busy city, horns honking, people shouting across crowded sidewalks, and the constant buzz of distant chatter. Among the throng of pedestrians, John Cena, the well-known professional wrestler turned actor, strolled down the sidewalk with a relaxed gait, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He had been in the city for a few days, taking a break from his hectic schedule, looking for nothing more than a quiet walk to clear his mind. But as he walked past a row of aging buildings, something caught his attention. A group of older teenagers, about 17 or 18 years old, stood by the street corner, their laughter ringing through the air like a harsh, cruel sound. John, who had always prided himself on his calm demeanor, couldn't ignore it. He turned his gaze to see what was causing the ruckus. At the crosswalk, an elderly man stood frozen, his cane shaking slightly in his hand. His gray hair fluttered in the wind, and his face was contorted with an expression of uncertainty. He had tried to cross the street, but the traffic was unforgiving, the cars speeding past with little care. The old man hesitated, then tried to take a step, only to stop again as the cars rushed by. The group of boys, loud and obnoxious, found this spectacle hilarious. One of them, a tall, lanky kid with messy brown hair, mimicked the old man's shaky movements, making exaggerated gestures with his arms. Another, with a cruel grin, laughed so hard that his chest shook. "Hey, Grandpa, you need a hand," the boy yelled, his voice dripping with mockery. John couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mind raced with thoughts of how out of place such cruelty was in a city that, for all its noise and chaos, should have been full of kindness and empathy. But instead, here were these boys, young enough to know better, but still so full of arrogance and entitlement, laughing at an elderly man struggling to make it across the street. John's first instinct was to ignore them. He'd never been the kind of person to get involved in situations like this, preferring to mind his own business. But something inside him stirred. He couldn't just walk away. It wasn't in him to stay silent when people were treated with such disrespect. Without giving it a second thought, John made his way toward the corner. His footsteps were purposeful, echoing through the air, but the teenagers didn't notice him at first. He stood behind them for a moment, watching the old man, who now looked even more lost in the chaos of the intersection. "Hey, fellas," John said, his voice low but firm. The boys turned around, their expressions changing from amusement to surprise. At first, they didn't recognize him. They just saw a large, muscular man, probably in his late 40s, who stood out against the urban backdrop. But as the recognition set in, their faces shifted to something closer to embarrassment. John didn't wait for them to speak. He stepped toward the elderly man, his hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You okay, sir?" John asked, his voice filled with warmth and concern. The old man looked up at him, his eyes wide and grateful. I just don't know if I can make it," he said, his voice trembling. John gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I've got you." He gently helped the man to his feet and guided him across the street, blocking the noise of the city with his presence. As they walked, John could hear the boys behind them, muttering to each other, some of their bravado fading as they realized their actions had been noticed by someone who wouldn't let it slide. The last boy, the one who had mocked the old man the most, opened his mouth to say something, but John was already beyond the point of listening. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the best response to ignorance. As the man reached the other side of the street safely, John turned back toward the boys one last time. "You might want to think about how you treat people," he said quietly, his tone still calm but filled with an unspoken weight. "Not everyone's as lucky as you." The boys didn't answer, and John didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and began to walk down the street again, the sound of his footsteps taking him farther away from the incident. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He had done the right thing, sure, but the boys' laughter still echoed in his ears. John continued his walk, the brisk autumn air biting at his skin. The city was alive, bustling, yet something about the interaction lingered in his mind. He was used to the world's sharp edges, the bitter moments that could sour even the sweetest of days. But there was something about this encounter that felt different. It wasn't just the boys laughing at the elderly man, nor the kindness he'd shown in helping the stranger across the street. It was the realization that moments like this, small, seemingly insignificant moments, could make a world of difference. Or perhaps they could mean nothing at all. He turned a corner and walked a few blocks before finding a small cafe to stop in. It wasn't his usual place. He had never been one to frequent the more fashionable spots, but it had a quiet, comfortable atmosphere. The kind of place where you could disappear for an hour and no one would ask questions. He ordered coffee and sat down by the window, looking out at the street where the incident had taken place, his mind racing with thoughts. John's phone buzzed, snapping him back to reality. It was a text from his manager, reminding him about a meeting later in the day. He replied absent-mindedly, still staring out the window. But then a new message popped up, this one from his friend, Mike, asking if he'd seen the viral video that had gone around. Mike, hey, did you see that video of you with the old guy today? You're trending, dude. John furrowed his brow. He wasn't one to seek attention, and the idea of a video circulating with his face in it didn't sit well. He opened the link Mike had sent and watched, his stomach sinking as the footage played. It wasn't just a video of him helping the old man. It was a video of him confronting the boys. His words, "You might want to think about how you treat people," echoed through the clip, and it was clear the confrontation had been recorded without his knowledge. As the video continued, the laughter of the boys, along with their shocked expressions, was captured in full. The entire thing lasted less than a minute, but it was clear the video had gone viral in the short time since the incident. It was posted across social media, picked up by local news outlets, and reshared by thousands of people. John watched, mesmerized by the rapid rise of attention. Mike, I don't know if it's a good look or not, but people are talking. You know how this stuff goes. John closed his phone and sat back in his chair, processing what he had just seen. On one hand, it was exactly the kind of thing that could go viral in a heartbeat, a real-life moment of kindness mixed with a dose of social commentary. But on the other hand, it left him feeling exposed in a way he hadn't anticipated. Was he being praised for doing the right thing? Or was it just another example of how people would use anything to get views? Suddenly, the door to the cafe swung open, and in walked one of the boys from earlier, the tall, lanky one who had mocked the old man the most. He wasn't alone. Another boy, one with dark hair and a leather jacket, was with him. They stood by the counter for a moment, and John couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "Man, this is messed up," the lanky boy said, rubbing his neck nervously. "That video. We look like idiots." The other boy chuckled, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was awkward, uncomfortable. "We were just messing around. But now it's everywhere. People are making it into this whole thing." John's heart sank. He hadn't expected this. He had assumed they would laugh it off, go back to their lives. But the reality was much more complicated than he thought. The video had made them the center of a firestorm they hadn't anticipated. He stood up and walked over to the counter, where the two boys were still talking. His presence was enough to make them turn, their eyes wide with surprise. Neither of them expected to see him there. "Hey," John said, his voice calm but firm. "Look, I don't want to make this worse for you. I didn't mean for the whole thing to blow up like this." The lanky boy looked at him, his face a mixture of shame and frustration. "You think we wanted this? You think we meant for it to go viral?" John nodded, his voice softening. "I get it. People do stupid things. We've all been there." The other boy, the one with the leather jacket, sighed deeply, looking down at his shoes. "Yeah, but this feels like more than just a stupid thing. It's like people are waiting for us to be the villains." John understood the feeling. He had been in the public eye long enough to know how quickly the internet could turn something small into something monumental, how the rush to judge and label could overshadow the actual intentions behind an action. "I'm not here to make you out to be the bad guys," John continued. "I just don't want it to be like this. You've got to own up to what happened, though. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing the right thing when you mess up." The lanky boy's expression softened a little. "I don't even know if I can fix this. People already think I'm a jerk." John smiled gently. "You can. It's not too late. You can start by owning up to what happened, and maybe it'll make a difference." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then the leather-jacketed boy spoke up again. "You know, we're not all bad. We don't really think like that. It just came out wrong." John nodded. "That's the thing. People don't see everything. They don't see the whole picture." The boys stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But something had shifted. The tension between them had lightened, and for the first time, it seemed like they understood the weight of the situation. John excused himself and walked out of the cafe, the cool air biting at his skin once again. He knew there was more to come. The aftermath of the video would likely carry on for days, even weeks. But something had shifted in him too. He hadn't just helped the old man across the street. He had helped these boys understand something that maybe, just maybe, would change them for the better. And as he walked down the street, John Cena couldn't help but feel that, for once, the world wasn't such a harsh place after all. The next few days were a whirlwind for John Cena. The video of his encounter with the boys and the elderly man had taken on a life of its own, swirling through social media platforms and news outlets. People praised him for his kindness, sharing the clip with hashtags like #BeKind and #DoTheRightThing. It was a rare moment in the public eye that wasn't about his wrestling career or acting roles. Instead, it was about something that, in the grand scheme of things, seemed far more important. John wasn't sure how he felt about it. On the one hand, he had done the right thing. He had stepped in when others laughed at the old man's distress, and the attention from it had been overwhelmingly positive. But on the other hand, there was a nagging feeling deep inside him. The way people celebrated the moment made it feel less like an act of compassion and more like a spectacle. It was as if the kindness was only meaningful because it was being watched. At times, John found himself scrolling through the comments under the video, reading praise from strangers. Some of them wrote things like, "We need more people like this in the world," or "John Cena's a real hero, standing up for the vulnerable." But there was also a darker undercurrent to the praise. Some comments from viewers questioned the boys' actions and labeled them as bullies, without understanding the complexity of the situation. The comments turned into debates about class, entitlement, and the dehumanization of those who didn't have the privileges of people like John. It all made him uneasy. Then came a message. It was from the lanky boy, the one who had been the loudest and most mocking in the video. John had assumed he'd moved on, but apparently, the boy had been stewing over the situation for days. His message was brief, but it hit John hard. "Lanky boy, I've been thinking about what you said. About owning up to things. I don't know if I can make it right, but I want to try." John stared at the screen for a long time, his mind racing. This was unexpected. The boy had reached out not to apologize to the public or to try to make amends with him, but because he was truly wrestling with the consequences of his actions. John knew the pressure of being in the spotlight, but this was something different, a vulnerable moment of introspection from someone who had once seemed so sure of himself. After a moment's pause, John typed back, "John Cena, it's not about making it right overnight. It's about showing you understand. And it's never too late to start. Let me know how I can help." Sam replied almost instantly. "Sam, I'm going to apologize to the old man. I don't know how, but I will. I think I need to do it face to face." John smiled, feeling a small sense of relief. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that week, as John prepared for his next meeting, his phone rang again. It was the old man, the one John had helped across the street. "Hello." John answered, slightly surprised. "Mr. Cena?" The voice on the other end was shaky but warm. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I've been meaning to reach out to you. I don't know if you remember, but I do remember," John said, cutting him off with a smile in his voice. "I'm glad you called." The old man chuckled softly. "You're a good man. I wanted you to know I saw the video too. And I saw how those boys got called out. At first, I was just glad you helped me across the street. But after seeing how much attention it got, I've been thinking about it. I think maybe you were right. Those boys, they don't know what it's like to struggle, to feel invisible. And I think maybe they'll learn from this." John felt a warmth in his chest. He had never expected the old man to think so deeply about the incident, but he could hear the wisdom in his words. "You know," the old man continued, "I've lived a long time, seen a lot of things. But there's something about how things play out now. People like to point fingers and judge, but they forget the importance of second chances. I think they deserve a second chance, those boys." John paused, thinking about the ripple effect the video had set off. It wasn't just about the boys, or even about him. It was about how kindness and accountability could shift something from trivial mockery into a genuine opportunity for growth. Maybe this whole incident would lead to something bigger than anyone could have imagined. "Yeah," John said, his voice steady. "You're right. We all deserve second chances." Days later, John learned that Sam had tracked down the elderly man and made an effort to apologize in person. It wasn't perfect. There were stumbles, awkward silences, and even moments where neither of them knew what to say. But the old man had listened, and Sam had genuinely expressed his remorse. The two of them, both from different walks of life, sat together on a bench in the park and talked for hours. They didn't fix the past, but they made the future seem a little brighter. As John watched from a distance, a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. He had played a role in a small moment, a single encounter on the streets of the city. But in the end, it wasn't just about the boys learning from their mistakes. It was about everyone involved taking a step forward. The world, he realized, was filled with people who were still trying to figure things out. Maybe all anyone needed was a reminder that it was okay to be wrong, that it was okay to change. And sometimes that's all it took.